Hello and good evening.
Yeah, good evening, Mateusz. Great to speak to you.
Great to speak to you. Thank you that you have found time for us. We are talking just in the beginning of October, and your countryman, Mark Rutte, former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, I think he was Prime Minister for 14 years or something like that.
Yeah,
So
four
quite long.
terms.
Yeah.
Four terms. Yeah.
So Mark Rutte has just become the Secretary General of NATO. You're an author of, I would say, classical book about the transatlantic ruling alliance. The book was published in 1948, if I'm not mistaken.
84, 84.
84, so it's
Yeah. 48, I was
40
1
years
year
ago.
old.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I would start with one maybe quite provocative question. What to do being a citizen of NATO member state from, let's say, Eastern Europe to become, for instance, the Secretary General of NATO? Because a lot of Polish politicians had such ambitions in the past, like, former President Aleksander Kwaśniewski, Radek Sikorski, who
Piskorski,
is the
yeah.
Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but they didn't manage to do that. What would they have to do to become another Secretary General of NATO after Mark Rutte?
You mean career advice?
Yes, for them,
Yeah,
a free career advice if they
yeah,
hear
yeah,
us.
Well, you know these people better than I do, but I would think that Kwasniewski is already too deep in personal interest-related activities to ever get a place like this. And yeah, Sikorski has also shown um, rather excessive comments, like for instance, when Nord Stream was bombed, he sent out a tweet with the text, "Thank you, USA." That's a sort of undiplomatic gesture that would not be appreciated. Also, but that is speculative. Also, I think that Eastern Europe is still considered from the perspective of the NATO headquarters, which are really in the United States, Canada, and Britain, as a recently conquered area. So Eastern Europe is not supposed to take a leading role, although now, these days, there is an element of a Baltic bloc building up of the Baltic states, which are very prominent, certainly in relation to their population. With two European commissioners, for instance, Kallas and the man from Lithuania, who is the defense specialist. Now, to entrust such positions to people of very small countries is rather remarkable. So I really can't give any meaningful advice, except that I would say Eastern Europe should be trying to find its own way in international relations. And I must say that Viktor Orban of Hungary, in my view, deserves a Nobel Peace Prize, which is a more honorable reward than the NATO Secretary General, for his courageous trip to Kiev, Moscow, and Beijing.
Mm-hmm.
That is what I think should be an example for other East European, for all European nations, in fact, just as Fico of Slovakia showed great independence of mind and personal courage that we can only admire. So there is an interesting potential in Eastern Europe, judging from my modest position here, where politicians can distinguish themselves in a more meaningful way than becoming the mouthpiece of the most militaristic organization in human history, which is NATO.
Mhm.
Therefore, I'm not at all proud that Rutte has become the Secretary General.
I've read some pieces of information about his early life and biography.
Yeah.
From the class point of view, he probably represents, let's say, upper middle class, right?
Well, in my nomenclature, but that's not um, too important. I would say he's a typical petty bourgeois.
Mhm.
So, like most of us, let's be honest, we are in the middle. And he was certainly not upper middle class. He was a petty bourgeois like all others, looking for a career. So he was very career oriented from the start. And that has brought him now, after a long stint as prime minister, to the NATO Secretary Generalship. Don't forget that in the 1980s, the Netherlands was still seen as a country which suffered from the so-called Dutch disease. And the Dutch disease was that we didn't follow NATO instructions. For instance, when in 1979 there was a decision taken by NATO to deploy new missiles, nuclear missiles in Western Europe, also in the Netherlands. There were mass demonstrations here. A really very encouraging sign that we and also Denmark at that time were resisting this dangerous step, which was meant to finally destabilize the Warsaw Pact countries' military command and ultimately threaten the Soviet Union.
Mhm.
Rutte has taken the Netherlands under his as a prime minister from that position, so from a country suffering from the Dutch disease and a decent amount of pacifism, nuclear pacifism in particular, to a front runner, a front NATO front state. So we have now delivered, along with Denmark, incidentally, F-16
Mhm.
planes for the Kiev regime, fighting its war with breakaway provinces and now against Russia. So that's a very remarkable transformation in a very short time.
Mhm.
So that's, I would say that's a very dishonorable role. Why? Because if you change the character and the political profile of a country in this way so radically in the wrong direction, whereas a figure like Orban, who's more of a traditional nationalist perspective, has the courage in his role as representative of a relatively weak state to
Mhm.
make the trip that I just referred to, I would say we can take him as an example. Rutte in no way is an example. I won't even go into all kind of personal details um, that, for instance, he as a young liberal leader, or I mean, a leader of the young liberals in the Netherlands, he advocated at one point the legalization of sexual relations with animals,
Hmm.
uh, which is which I'm sure will go down well in Eastern European, more socially conservative countries. I always found that very, very embarrassing. And there are also newspaper interviews of him in this domain of very personal relations, which I think he would not be happy to see coming back in the publicity. But they are there. They can still be found on the internet, and that tells you something of a personality who is not who doesn't have a solid position in the social order, so to speak, who is very volatile in his personal choices, which in turn makes him, of course, yeah, open to blackmail. That I consider that a serious risk. But of course, his belligerency, his warlike outlook, his absurd anti-Russian position has brought him this reward. And mind you, he's not the first to try a NATO Secretary Generalship. Of course, we had Dirk Sticker in the early days of NATO, a big beer manager, and also of Heineken, and also a liberal politician. We had Joseph Luns, an ultra-conservative Catholic, who was also NATO Secretary General. And then our more recent Prime Minister, Ruud Lubbers, also wanted to become NATO Secretary General. But then he was interviewed in the American embassy in The Hague in the presence of some other people who wanted to hear what his views were. And it turned out he was not militant enough to become NATO Secretary General. So this was a man more of a compromise. And they said, well, we can't have you in that role. Now, Rutte, of course, did qualify, and now we're stuck with him. But let me add as a final note, don't overrate the importance of the NATO Secretary General. The real decisions are, of course, taken in Washington and London. And the NATO Secretary General merely adds some public relations aspects and is supposed to speak for them.
Exactly. I just wanted to find out well, the model biography, let's say, and social background of such people.
Yeah.
It was quite interesting for me, for instance, to find out that Rutte used to work for one of the global corporations, Unilever.
Yeah, but not in a top position. Huh?
Yes, as a middle manager.
Yeah.
Right, but anyway, this is a kind of model career, I think. To move from the corporations, from the jobs in the corporations, with the mentality created by the corporate style there, to the governmental position. Do you think that such biography, like working for international structures, international corporationist structures, could affect somehow those people?
Well, I think having a position like that is more or less self-evident for the sort of person that he was. I think it's more relevant to know that at some point there was a chance that a right-wing woman was a candidate for the leadership of the Dutch Liberal Party. The Dutch Liberal Party is a right-wing liberal party. And it was to stop her that Rutte was suddenly advanced and pushed forward to take her place, because he was more acceptable as her name was Rita Verdonk. She was, let us say, the more the right-wing populist person. And Rutte was pushed forward to make sure that a more general, neutral, basically non-committal figure would take her would prevent her from being the party leader. And that was really the start of his career. And I think that is a more important determinant of his role than his background in a company, because at the level where he was, that doesn't yet give you a very specific worldview, I would think. His worldview was there first, and it wasn't much anyway, because this is a career person who wants to get ahead. And so he's willing to say anything, as long as he knows it is important to help him on his career path.
I think he has made several statements criticizing Donald Trump in the past, as far as I remember. And do you think that possible electoral victory of Donald Trump in the coming elections could bring some, let's say, internal problems or discussions between him and the US administration?
Yeah, but judging from the last time that Trump was president, Trump is an outsider. So Trump can also be characterized as a populist in many ways, but also as somebody who doesn't depart, who doesn't have the ability to break away from the systemic position of the United States. The United States is its military industrial complex, its big oil companies, and then Trump also represents the Christian Zionists and the Jewish Zionist bloc within the American power structure. And last time also, it was clear that Trump didn't have the ability to even, for instance, he had promised to look again into the Assange case. And once he was president, he was asked, what are you going to do about Assange? And his reply was, I don't know the man. So there's Trump for you. Now, for Rutte, he will not be alone in criticizing Trump, because Trump on many occasions has said that NATO for him is an outdated structure. And I couldn't agree more. Because of its expansion, it is now a direct cause for conflict with Russia. And I must honestly say that although war is a tragedy and a crisis for every country involved in it, even for a country that wins a war, it's a crisis and a tragedy. But I must say that in the current circumstances, I hope that the performance of the Russian armed forces in Ukraine will help to instill some fear, some rational fear among NATO countries, simply to keep NATO from new adventures. Therefore, I find it shocking that we don't have stable and accomplished politicians in key roles, but we have Kallas, who has the understanding of world politics of a 10-year-old, and that man from Lithuania, who already stated that we will be in a war with Russia within 6 to 8 years. I mean, these are the people who are leading us now in these sensitive domains. And Rutte is not better. Rutte, but he's not so stupid that he would ever make such statements.
Yes, I think that such statements are part of role played by Eastern European politicians. The Lithuanian member of European Commission is not the only one, of course.
No,
we have a lot of Polish politicians like that with quite similar statements. Unfortunately, yes. But coming back to US elections and US power structure, you have written a lot about it. And what do you think about people such as J.D. Vance? Because he has been recently promoted by some parts of, let's say, anti-system media as maybe a kind of real alternative, a real Trumpist.
Yeah.
Maybe some claim that Trump is not a Trumpist, but J.D. Vance is a Trumpist for sure. Yes.
Yeah. Well, first of all, before you go into the personalities of these top American politicians, we have to realize that the political positions in a country as diverse and as interest-driven as the United States, the personality of the president doesn't make so much of a difference any longer. I think the American ruling class at some point has decided, or at least key elements in the ruling class have decided, that never again should a person like John F. Kennedy, for instance, or even later from the other side, Richard Nixon, be allowed to occupy the White House and follow his own assessment of a situation. I mean, Kennedy came in as a Cold War candidate, but was very soon brought to his senses by the Cuban Missile Crisis and so on, and then began to rethink the situation. Now today we have a situation in which presidents are no longer expected to do any rethinking about anything. They simply have to sit there, do the photo ops, make signatures on documents that are handed to them by others. So that is the first thing. The interesting thing of the Trump campaign is, of course, that he has been able to attract people like Robert Kennedy Jr., who would really change the medical administration of the United States, but also Tulsi Gabbard, the woman who is a former military person and who has very sensible ideas about world politics. I wouldn't know what sort of role she can play in a Trump administration, because Trump has an obsessive hatred of Iran and all other enemies of Israel, because Trump is being funded by the ultra-Zionist element in the American power structure. For instance, the Las Vegas betting king was his most important. Sheldon, what's his name? I forget his name now. But anyway, these are the people backing up Trump, and that means that whatever he would personally think, he would never be in a position to depart from the commitments that he has made to the people sponsoring him. And this is really this is in the order of, let's say, $100 million for campaign money. So. And yeah, J.D. Vance is indeed, as you say, a Trumpist, even more than Trump himself. So yeah, it is a topical issue because there have already been 2 assassination attempts on Trump. So it becomes more interesting to know who is the vice presidential candidate. But in that respect, he wouldn't make much of a difference.
Mm-hmm. So
Kennedy does, although Kennedy also is a extremely pro-Israel for some reason or other. In other areas, he's really an important figure in my mind.
But no matter who is elected and who will be the future president of the United States, the power structure will remain the same. So how would you define the main parts, the main elements of this power structure?
Well, the first thing that you have to see, I think, I hope I'm not too theoretical here, but the first thing that you have to see is that the power of the United States doesn't arise out of United States society, because the condition of that society is dramatic. I'm sure you have seen images of American inner cities. Completely degraded infrastructure of the country. So you have the paradox that what is by many still seen today as the most powerful country in the world is in fact a country which is on the brink of collapse. And that means that the real driving force, the real social force that is able to act in the name of the United States is not the United States political system, but is United States capital. So it's the oil companies, as I said, the military industrial complex, and a number of other, let's not forget the IT complex, the information technology block of Silicon Valley and other companies. So that tension between the actual US society and the forces governing the world market, like BlackRock, the big finance capital structures. That tension is really very important, because it can be that while international capital or American capital is still governing the world market and dictating politics in many areas of the world, its own society at its back is falling apart. And yeah, that also makes it so important what will come out of the BRICS meeting. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa now with a whole host of countries joining them. And possibly even continuing from within this bloc to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which would also transfer their security concerns to a different bloc. That is not an automatic alternative, because it will have to see what comes out of this meeting in Kazan in Russia. But here I'm involved in several initiatives here in the Netherlands and Belgium, where we will be speaking about this BRICS meeting and what it means for the world's balance of forces. And I think we are, well, luckily, I don't think lucky, it's a lucky thing, but we are in the midst of a changing of the world balance of forces. Although, of course, Russia, China, and India are not automatic allies. There are many tensions, underlying tensions between this bloc, but the aggressiveness of the West, as it were, drives these countries towards each other.
That's very interesting when it comes to BRICS. Some people perceive BRICS as a kind of tactical alliance, which is more something temporary for decreasing with the task of decreasing the US hegemony. Yeah. Some others claim that it will be a new world order structure in the future. But for instance, John Mearsheimer claims that the most stable and safe world is when we have a bipolar world order. And he gives, of course, the example of the Cold War that was more or less safe from his point of view. What do you think? Will this multipolar world, which is now, I think, just shaping and creating also within the ranks of BRICS, will it be more stable or more fragile than the Cold War world, the world which was dominated by United States and Soviet Union?
Yeah, well, that's always difficult to assess, but it is true that you said rightly that the BRICS are more of a tactical alliance. But we shouldn't forget that this tactical alliance at the moment is representing the peaceful alternative to an aggressive West, which is faced with decline. And yeah, it's of course more integrated than the BRICS, because in the West was built around a transnational capital, capital from the original British Empire to the United States and North American capital coming back to Europe, etc. That created what I call in my book the Atlantic ruling class. Such a thing doesn't exist in the BRICS bloc. There are no such organic relations to the same extent. There's no such cultural affinity between the different states. But if you realize that the most economically most powerful state, China in this case, has a 1,000-year history of peaceful relations with its neighbors, and a philosophy which goes back even further, which is based on the idea that if you behave in a proper way and you have a dignified posture towards the rest of the world will look at you as a factor of stability. Now, I think that also has attracted notably Russia to the Chinese position, but also a whole number of other countries like Indonesia, which is often forgotten about, which is the fourth largest country in terms of population. And they too are beginning to gravitate to the BRICS bloc in a very clear way. Iran is the same. You know, these are countries that have all kind of drawbacks and problems, but they are not aggressive. They have no armies standing ready. They have not, like the United States, 800 military bases around the world. Nothing of the sort is happening. And well, look at what's happening in Africa, for instance, that African countries now are involved in a sort of second decolonization process in which the French are forced to withdraw from West Africa. And instead of them, the Russians are welcomed. Russia is very popular. You must have seen the images of Traoré, the new leader of Burkina Faso, very handsome military guy with his red beret, visiting Moscow. Putin was really smiling as the situation that he was in. Now, those are things that should make us happy in the sense that Russia is not coming there, China is not coming to Africa as a conquering power, but it's coming to assist in this new decolonization process that's taking place before our eyes. And in that sense, you can say that at the moment, the majority of the world has already turned its back to the West, although we shouldn't think that that is something that can happen in a day's time. But it's turning its back on the West in a long-term process of reorienting towards what I think is a more peaceful bloc, which is focused on the real problems that we are facing, which is food security, combating pollution of the oceans and land. Well, I don't have to give you the whole catalog because you know it as well as I do. But generally, I think the BRICS is a bloc that represents, it's tactical, as you rightly say, but it represents an element of hope in a highly unstable world that we are living in today.
And what about Europe? You have recently written some articles about the process of militarization of European Union, as well as about, let's say, the dependence of Europe on United States. Do you think that in the future, in the context, by the way, of the latest report by Mario Draghi, which was in some moments, well, very softly, but anyway, it was he was quite critical towards the United States and the dominance of the United States over Europe and so on. Nevertheless, do you think that Europe could become a kind of independent player in the multipolar world of the future?
No, I'm afraid that what Europe has already lost in the first decades of the 21st century, in terms of, for instance, its industry. German industry is now being decimated as a consequence of its loss of affordable energy. French industry is also gone, apart from its military industry, which also holds for Germany, by the way. The military industries are surviving, but you can't build a healthy economy on the basis of military industry alone. And France has simply sold out. Macron has played a very bad role here. And from the United States, of course, Europe is looked at as a potential trouble spot. For instance, in 2003, when Britain and the United States decided to invade Iraq, there was this very promising alliance between Schröder for Germany, Chirac for France, with Putin and with China. And a number of other, Brazil, and the BRICS were already beginning to become more relevant. I think that I've heard people say that the United States wanted to make sure that never again would an American-British initiative be in a position where it encounters resistance from a set of powerful European politicians. So that was the end of Schröder, that was the end of Chirac, the end of his foreign secretary, de Villepin, who's a very eloquent and insightful politicians, because all these people have been sidelined now. And Europe has been reduced to a position of a vassal bloc, in which, as I just said, the Baltic bloc, so the Baltic states, Sweden and Finland and Poland, are playing the role of new, fairly aggressive anti-Russian states. And I had the great pleasure to visit Poland at your own invitation with people from Mieszpolska. And I always felt that this anti-Russian attitude actually doesn't reflect the Polish character that I met in so many people. Of course, it's not a cross-section of the entire population, but I think that the governments now of these Baltic states are more aggressive against Russia than is warranted by the actual attitude of their populations, which is much more peaceful, much more friendly. And I've not seen one during our visit to Poland. I've not seen one instance of anti-Russian sentiment or in any of the cities where we visited.
Remember that you're in a circle of people who are
Yeah, I know.
supporting, let's say, non-mainstream ideas here in Poland.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I'm glad to hear that you have noticed that Poland is not only the ideas of the Russophobic elite here and ruling class here, but going back to Europe, I would like to ask you about the rise of, let's say, right and left-wing political parties in countries like Germany, for instance.
Yeah.
Parties which rise because of the crisis of German economy. You have told about it. I mean, of course, Alternative für Deutschland and Sarah Wagenknecht are two most prominent parties.
Yeah.
Some other parties in other European countries as well, European Union countries, I mean, Austria, France, and the Netherlands, I guess also, yes, has some smaller, of course, but nevertheless, more or less sovereignist, let's call them sovereignist parties. Do you think that they might rise to such an importance and relevance that they could somehow break the ties of dependence from the United States and the Anglo-Saxon axis?
Well, I don't know what the future will bring, but you have to realize that, for instance, if I may give the example of the Netherlands, here for the first time, our right-wing populist party, anti-immigrant party, Geert Wilders, a name that it's not a real party, it's only his personal list. There's no party organization. But anyway, he won the elections. So he was the largest party. But it's impossible to have him as a prime minister. Why? Because with his anti-Islam statements, which are usually completely meaningless because it doesn't bring any result for anyone, he cannot be the prime minister of a country which deals extensively with the Arab world, for instance, with Saudi Arabia, with the Gulf states. So what did they do? They formed a government of less clearly party-associated people, and they put at the head the former head of the Dutch Secret Service. So our prime minister now is a completely inexperienced person when it comes to acting in the limelight. You know, Rutte, compared to that, is a political genius. This man is like a shadow of himself, because he was used to work for what is called the deep state. You know, that he was successively in all secret services. And that means that the ruling class, which is always invisible and which is not politically represented in a direct sense, but the people who really pull the strings are able to avoid a consequential right-wing populist victory by an arrangement like this. It doesn't have to be the same. But the positive thing of the last elections, regional elections in Thuringia and Saxony in Germany, have shown us that we may be in a transition where because the socialists and the Greens failed completely. You know, they were almost wiped off the map in these two provinces, which of course have a history of their own, but that's a different matter. And what we see is the contours of a new political system in which you have the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, on the right side, and Sarah Wagenknecht and the Linke, who will, I think, in due course follow her line on the left side. And that means that an entire new political system is being born. Now, that is my hope. My hope is that between these poles of parties that more adequately express the concerns of the population at large, which is that we want no more immigration, mass immigration, that between these poles in the political system, a meaningful discussion can be started about the future of a social economic order in our part of the world. Whereas these old parties have lost all credibility because of their subservience to the NATO line. So in that sense, my own feeling is that the recent elections in Germany really represent a ray of hope, not in the sense that there's one clear winner, but there is a political configuration of forces which is taking the place of a discredited traditional Christian democratic, social democratic, green political order, which in Germany, of course, is also a joke. If you think of the Minister of Economics, Habeck, of the Foreign Minister, Baerbock, I mean, compare a Baerbock to a Lavrov of Russia. They
I
wouldn't
cannot even imagine them standing.
they wouldn't be able to exchange any meaningful idea because the other wouldn't understand it.
Of course. Well, let's hope that the system parties will also be replaced by some other political forces in
I hope so.
my country, in Poland, which has also very, let's say, archaic party system, as you know.
Yeah.
Our viewers and readers asked me to ask you one very important question. It will be the last question, but the question is about your plans, about the books you plan, because a lot of people watching us have read your book in Polish, and
great.
they really are impressed by what you write, and would be eager to read another book like that by you in Polish in the future. So what are your plans?
Well, I'm currently working on two main book projects. One is on the history leading up to the 9/11 attacks in the United States, because I still think that the whole idea of the war on terror should be analyzed more deeply, not just in the sense that there were only two planes in New York and three buildings and they all fell, all three. That we know that now. But what is the deeper meaning of that event? What did it do to democracy? What did it mean for the entire series of American British attacks on the enemies of Israel in the Middle East? That is one project that I'm working on, and the other is called The Twilight of the Atlantic Ruling Class, in which I want to show that I wrote this book, The Making of the Atlantic Ruling Class, which was really the moment that the British financial elite sought support from the United States to withstand the challenge of mainly Germany, of German capital. So we have to go back. In that book, I went back again to the First World War and so on. And now we live in the twilight of the Atlantic ruling class, because the forces that supported that vigorous bloc formation in the ruling class at the time are no longer there, and it's now disintegrating. So what I want to show is that other societies are now more vigorous, have more life force in them, It's not in the same way ruling class. There's not, of course, there are oligarchies in Russia, in China, but they tend to be tamed by politicians representing state power and state sovereignty. And that is really a topic that deserves treatment in depth. And well, I hope that my health holds out some more time and that I can finish these two projects. And I would be extremely proud if you would help me to get that to a Polish readership as well, because last time I was already very happy to see it arrive with Publishers Factory in Wrocław.
Yes, we are really excited with the idea of publishing your new books in Polish, and again, it will be also an opportunity, I hope, to invite you to our country.
Oh, I would love to.
Maybe to other cities as well, because you have managed to meet in 3 Polish cities, as far as I remember. Warsaw, Wrocław, and
Krakow.
Krakow, yes. But there are a lot of people waiting for your visit in other Polish cities as well.
You're flattering me.
Kees, thank you very much for today's interview. And well, there are so many topics and questions I would like to ask you. I guess that a lot of our viewers will write new questions and other questions in their comments. So if you agree, we'll collect the questions and ask you the questions separately in another interview.
That would be a great honor. Thank you.
Thank you very much.